The ghostly priest. It was a cold and misty evening. As I found myself walking towards the old Catholic church on the outskirts of town, I had always been drawn to its eerie beauty, a place where centuries of prayers and secrets were held within its walls. As I entered the church, the heavy wooden doors creaked behind me, and a chill ran down my spine. The air inside was thick with the scent of aged wood and incense. The flickering candles cast eerie shadows on the stone walls, and the silence was broken only by the distant sound of my footsteps, echoing in the vast nave. I wandered towards the confessional, a small chamber tucked away in a corner. The room was dimly lit, illuminated by a single candle on the priest's side. The heavy velvet curtain separating the priests from the penitents swayed gently in the breeze, though there was no wind to be felt. Taking a deep breath, I entered the confessional and knelt down, my heart racing. I had never been one to confess my sins openly, but the mysterious aura of the church seemed to draw my secrets to the surface. As I began to speak, recounting my transgressions in hushed tones, a shiver ran through me. Midway through my confession, I felt a sudden change in the atmosphere. The air grew colder, and a strange, almost electric energy filled the confined space. My words caught in my throat as I saw a figure materialize on the other side of the velvet curtain, a ghostly apparition of a priest. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, and his robe seemed to ripple like smoke. I stared in terror as the ghostly priest began to respond to my confession, his voice a haunting whisper that seemed to echo from beyond the realm of the living. He spoke of forgiveness and redemption, but his words held a supernatural weight that sent a shiver down my spine. I couldn't tear my gaze away from his spectral form, trapped between fascination and fear. And then, as abruptly as he had appeared, the ghostly priest fell silent. The air in the confessional grew even colder, and I felt a presence behind me. Slowly, I turned my head to see the actual priest of the church standing at the door. His expression a mix of concern and confusion. He asked if I was all right, breaking the trance that had held me captive. I stammered, trying to find my voice, and when I turned my gaze back to the confessional, the ghostly priest was gone. The heavy velvet curtain swayed with an empty draft, and the candlelight flickered innocently. I stumbled out of the confessionale, my heart pounding in my chest. The priest helped me to a pew, and I recounted the eerie encounter I had just experienced. He listened patiently, his brow furrowing as he considered my words. As I left the church that night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes following my every step. The memory of the ghostly priest's hollow gaze haunted my thoughts, a reminder that the boundary between the living and the dead is never as solid as it seems. The haunting veil. It was a cold, moonless night, and my friend Mark and I found ourselves alone in the dimly lit corridors of St. Agnes Church. We were sacristans and responsible for ensuring everything was prepared for the upcoming Sunday Mass. But that night, something was off. Our priest, Father Michael, was nowhere to be found. The air inside the church felt heavy, as if an unsettling presence lingered amongst the pews. Mark and I exchanged nervous glances, but our duty urged us forward. As we walked towards the priest's office, the wooden floors creaked beneath our feet, echoing through the silent sanctuary. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows on the walls, making the crucifixes seem like they were watching our every move. We reached the door to Father Michael's office and hesitated for a moment before knocking. There was no response. Swallowing our unease, I slowly pushed the door open, revealing a room draped in shadows. The desk was neat and the chair was pushed in, as if no one had been there for hours. Mark's eyes widened as he pointed towards the far corner of the room. I turned to see what had caught his attention and froze. Outside the window, under the dim glow of the streetlight, stood a figure dressed in a flowing black habit. The moonlight barely touched her face, but her eyes seemed to pierce through the darkness, locking onto ours. With hesitant steps, we made our way towards the chapel at the heart of the church. The atmosphere grew even heavier as we reached the entrance. The door creaked open, revealing rows upon rows of empty pews. The altar was adorned with candles, their flames dancing as if in the presence of an ethereal force. And there, standing at the front of the chapel, was the Black Nun. Her eyes were fixed on us, her expression an enigmatic mix of sorrow and malevolence. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant sound of wind rattling the stained glass windows. I asked who she was, but no response. She seemed to glide towards us, her movements hauntingly graceful. My heart pounded in my chest as fear gripped me like a vice. Mark and I exchanged a look of sheer terror, realizing that our only option was to flee. We turned and ran through the corridors, our footsteps echoing through the empty church. It felt like the walls were closing in on us, as if the very building itself was alive with some sinister intention. As we burst through the church doors and stumbled into the moonlit night, we dared not look back. Our lungs burned as we raced away from St. Agnes Church, the image of the Black Nun forever etched in our minds. The forgotten church. It was a gloomy autumn evening, the air thick with an eerie stillness, as my boyfriend and I found ourselves stranded on a desolate country road. Our car had broken down in the middle of nowhere, and with no cell phone signal to call for help, we were left with no choice but to seek refuge until morning. As we looked around, a dim light flickered in the distance, cutting through the encroaching darkness. We followed the feeble glow and stumbled upon an ancient church, its time-worn walls covered in ivy, as if nature itself was trying to claim it. The sight was both haunting and strangely inviting. So we cautiously approached the entrance. Pushing the heavy wooden doors open, we were met with a rush of cold air that sent shivers down our spines. The interior was equally aged, with pews that seemed to creak with the weight of forgotten prayers, and a silence so profound that it felt like the world outside had ceased to exist. Hours passed, marked only by the soft drip of rain leaking through the dilapidated roof, with nothing but the dim glow of our flashlight to keep us company. The church seemed to take on a life of its own. It was as if the whispers of the past were echoing through the walls, secrets long buried now, seeking an audience. My boyfriend and I huddled close, trying to ignore the unease that settled in the pit of our stomachs. We tried to make light of the situation, joking nervously and attempting to distract ourselves from the oppressive atmosphere. But even laughter couldn't drown out the sense that we were being watched. And then, as the clock struck midnight, the temperature dropped even further, and a chilling breeze swept through the church, extinguishing our flashlight. We were plunged into complete darkness, our hearts racing as we fumbled to relight it. That's when I saw it, a faint, ethereal figure at the far end of the aisle. A ghostly apparition stood there, dressed in garments that seemed to belong to another era, its face obscured by shadows. I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin, and my boyfriend's grip tightened on my hand. We were frozen, unable to tear our eyes away from the haunting figure before us. The ghostly presence seemed to glide toward us, its movements silent and deliberate. Panic surged through me, and I whispered a desperate plea for protection under my breath, and just as suddenly as it had appeared, the apparition dissipated, vanishing into thin air. With the return of our flashlight's feeble light, we stumbled out of the church, our hearts pounding and our minds racing. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, a tow truck arrived to rescue us from our stranded predicament. We didn't dare mention the ghostly encounter, fearing that no one would believe our harrowing tale. To this day, my boyfriend and I can't shake the feeling that the old church held secrets of its own. Whether it was a trick of the mind or a genuine encounter with the supernatural, that experience will forever be etched in our memories.